We're just going to wait for a couple moments for people to pile in.
Yay! Hi, everyone. Now you really want to talk about Naruto?
Please do until I introduce.
No, because there are actual like book retailers and people who hold my future in their hands, so I don't want to scare them off by talking about anime and all the posters in my room. Childhood.
Okay, well, I'm going to just get started with the introduction while people continue to come into the room. Welcome to our event tonight, a conversation between friends about race and joy. I'm Linda Marie Barrett, the Executive Director of the Southen Independent Booksellers Alliance. Tonight's conversation is the keynote launch to SIBA's 21-day Racial Equity Challenge. Starting next Monday, April 12th, participants in the challenge will receive daily prompts that invite reflection, learning, action, and digging deeper into further resources. In light of escalating violence against people of color, most recently against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, this challenge is extremely timely and necessary. We hope the challenge will energize racial equity and anti-racism in your stores, your communities, and our industry. The link to sign up for the challenge is in the chat. We have the Q&A open for your questions. Luis, our bookseller moderator, will ask your questions of Ben as time permits. And now to introduce our speakers. Our bookseller host is Luis Correa, the operations manager at Avid Bookshop in Athens, Georgia, and a member of the American Bookseller Association's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Our keynote speaker is Ben Philippe, author of Sure I'll Be Your Black Friend, Notes from the Other Side of the Fist Bump, as well as the Field Guide to the North American Teenager and Charming as a Verb. Ben Philippe has covered media and culture for Vanity Fair, Observer, the AV Club, The Guardian, Playboy, and Thrillist. His short stories have appeared in 5 Quarterly, Louisiana Literature, and Bookanista. He currently teaches at Barnard College in Manhattan, New York. We are so honored that he made time to join us tonight for this very important conversation about race. So now I'm turning it over to you, Luis.
Thank you, Linda Marie. I'm so happy that you asked me to do this, and I'm so happy that Ben is here to talk to me about all of this. But first, I wanted to get off my chest that, Ben, isn't this kind of terrifying? Talking about like race in front of a lot of, it's like a really private kind of conversation that you sometimes tackle with your friends when it becomes an issue. And now like, we don't know who's here or listening. What do you feel?
Yeah, race has always been a thing that I didn't get to choose sort of like how I had the conversation. It was just always a conversation that happens around you and sometimes involves you. And I think there's always that innate risk of saying the wrong thing as a person of color with a lot of white friends. I think I've had a lot of conversations, especially in the past year, about, you know, hey, can I ask you this one thing? Can we talk about this without feeling weird? Because it's a very loaded and very heavy subject that affects us every day of our lives. But I think the only way forward is through. Like, we have to have this conversation. We have to talk about those things to come to any semblance of an understanding to try to make the world better. So I tend to go at it that way. And it should be said that Black is not the only ethnicity in the world. So there are a lot of conversations where I'm on the other side, where I'm just asking questions, trying to learn and be better.
Yeah, I feel like it takes a lot of the anxiety off of my shoulders when I decide to focus on my curiosity rather than on how difficult the conversation is going to be, because you do have to acknowledge that it's going to be it's going to be painful at some point, because when we're talking about race, we're talking about pain, we're talking about how it affects other people. And if you're just willing to learn, it really it helps you make that human connection with another person when you're having the discussion. Um, and I'm thinking about how so many friends asked you in this last year about questions regarding race. Was that not an issue beforehand? Are they just suddenly interested?
No, I think, I mean, this past year, people were interested for very specific reasons, because it felt like the conversation about race started to happen at a scale that it couldn't be avoided. And a lot of people had different entry points into it. I have friends that I would trust with my life who were, hey, should the conversation really be framed as, defund the police? Isn't that going too far? And I think one of the worst feelings you can have as a human being is to be corrected. I say that as a teacher who mispronounces a lot of words. Like when somebody corrects you, that first initial gut clench is like, oh, I did something wrong. Oh, someone's mad at me. And, powering past that in order to learn, being able to accept that you are probably wrong about things. You don't have the answer to everything. In order to sort of get at the person underneath, at the real conversation, there's a level of pain and discomfort in it. I also tend to approach it from the fact that it's a little conceptually the great human joke that we're all on the same planet, we all share the same resources, but because we look different and have different history, as a result of that, we can occupy the same space but have completely different experiences. So approaching it with some levity, with all the quotation marks involved, can help this conversation, in my very limited experience.
Right. And I think about what you said regarding how bad it feels when you get corrected, because I feel like we're all learning right now. And sometimes, and a lot of the way that we talk about race is new, because it's still being developed. So when someone misspeaks and I take it upon myself to let them know, or they take it upon themselves to let me know, I need to make sure that I separate my emotion, the initial reaction that I have, that like clenching feeling, separate that from what my response is going to be. I take a little like pause and think like, no, what I'm someone who is curious, who is wanting to make a connection, and let's go through it. Let's go forward, rather than let's focus on how I'm feeling about something that I said. So thank you for saying that. And I want to address the fact that it takes a lot of work to dismantle racism, and the burden shouldn't have to fall on the shoulders of BIPOC to have to like educate white people. But and you've already talked about this a little bit, when did you decide that you wanted to be the one, that you wanted to be the person to address this? Because I don't think, reading your book, that you started out being that way. There was a certain point, and what like provided the spark for you to start writing this book?
God, that is a high burden, to be the one. And also it's kind of wild that people have read this book now for so many months. It's been in my head and sort of as a galley, and now, oh, you've read the book, right? I don't know if that was one particular event. Truth is, for the longest time growing up, I didn't want to have the conversation about race. I thought it was a thing that if you don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. I remember in high school, 8th grade, I had a teacher, and he had done a lot of humanitarian work all over the world. And he was, you might call him one of the proto anti-racist people out there, because he really wanted to use his platform in front of like surly teenagers to talk about how racism was wrong in 2004, 2005. And I just wanted no part of it, because whenever we were in his class, he would show us these horrible movies about like Hotel Rwanda that were just like people butchering each other over race. And he would have like these meaningful soliloquies and make eye contact with, of course, the one black kid in the room. And I just wanted him to look away. I didn't want to, oh God, we're doing this because of me. And it just felt like a burden to talk about race. And then, honestly, this is a selfish answer, but I also wanted friends. I'm an only child, and I think those fraught discussions where like the end result of talking about this is that we may end up not talking anymore, right? If we, that's something I had to get over. The idea that like, okay, let's have the conversation. But in having the conversation, are you going to say something that even if I want to, I can't forget? Is something you say going to break this friendship or this human connection? And in that case, is it better just not to have it? Just to not talk about it, right? Go to the whole 1950s, just let's all be polite at dinner. Let's all talk about TV shows and books and just not talk about the hard things. That was another speed I lived in for a while. And then eventually, I don't know what changed. It's starting to feel like therapy. I think coming to America where race is historically loaded in a way that perhaps it wasn't in Haiti and it wasn't in Canada, the previous two countries where I lived, I just felt like I had to engage with this discussion because I was being engaged into it. Someone calls you boy, you can smile through it. I definitely developed the habit of smiling through it, but eventually I just didn't feel like smiling anymore. So let's have the awkward conversation. Yeah, that might have been an accrued change that took place over time. And I think I started to teach and work with younger people and work with children. And I just realized that, a lifetime of avoiding those conversations is not the solution, because then we're going to have children. We're going to pass this on to other generations. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes you try to look for like the genesis and take the easy like one moment out of it, but really like because you were Black since you were born, like I can see how it's been like an accumulatory process. With me, issues about being Latino have always been around, and I grew up in a very Latino neighborhood, Latinx neighborhood, and so I was always deeply immersed in my culture, and I would always kind of take the back seat when it came to issues. So it really wasn't until I want to say last year when American Dirt came out, and a lot of activist readers took it upon themselves to speak out against American Dirt and its harmful effects. And I just kind of decided in that moment, like, you know what? I'm done being the person who sits back while this kind of stuff happens in front of me. Because for a long time, while the conversation about American Dirt was starting with all the arcs coming out, I had that feeling in the back of my, like in my throat, like I should maybe say something. This doesn't seem like right. But I waited and waited and waited, and I shouldn't have. So now I'm happy to be having this conversation in a very public space and trying to use my voice and my perspective to help better things. So thank you for being part of my journey there.
Better. It's awkward for everyone involved. I don't know if there's a specific solution beyond just powering through the awkwardness. And also, I think something I realized, and maybe it's the same for Latinx issues, that people will assume your opinion if you don't say anything. Silence is not neutral. So if you're silent about some things, you're like, hey, I'm just literally on Twitter to make jokes. That is why I joined the Bluebird, to make jokes and talk about TV shows. But when you don't talk about political things, about societal things that are coming to a boil, that neutrality is actually very loud. It's not silence. It's a loud lack of opinions to the world out there. And I think felt that last summer and this past year, like even a year later, I'm like, I still remember not you, but like people in my life, like you didn't post anything about Black Lives Matter. A full summer, you never spoke up. You talked about TV shows, you talked about books, you talked about, COVID, but this thing, you purposefully sidestepped it. And it's harder and harder for me these days to just like not go, why? To not sort of like quirk an eyebrow out at that. And then I think I reverse the perspective and, well, now, Asian Americans are going through something horrible in this country right now. And being quiet about it, sort of like not wanting to engage, that would be me sending a message out to the world. So I engage more, I ask questions, I try to amplify, and I hate those things, so it feels like we're all talking like YouTube influencers, but I just try to be open to the conversation, because when you're not, that silence gets filled by assumptions by other people.
Yeah, let's talk about the like confrontational aspects of this. So you mentioned that sometimes you'd be called like boy, and in retrospect, you think that's because they're calling me that because I'm Black. And in the book, you talk about how you learn later that that's called a microaggression, right? And I heard from authors Dr. Stephanie Pinder Amaker and Dr. Lauren Wadsworth, who wrote Did That Just Happen? They refer to microaggressions instead as identity-related aggressions, which takes the micro out because they don't feel very small, do they, when they happen? What has been your experience with that in the workplace, as a writer? And how do you react? Because in the moment, sometimes it just kind of like slaps you, and then it doesn't hurt until later when you think about it. I
think honestly, survival, which is a very dramatic way of putting it, was a reason why I tried not to react to microaggressions for the longest time, because if you get angry once, you become the angry Black guy. So I would just smile and go through it and choose not to make waves. But also, I'm an immigrant. I'm the child of immigrants. So I grew up with stories of how my grandmother lived in a tiny village without electricity, without water, and she would strap kids to her back to go get them vaccinated. So those are quote unquote real life struggle. And I think part of me always had them in the back of my mind whenever I felt I was experiencing a microaggression. I had that built-in urge to just like compare and lessen my own experience. Like, well, okay, that guy called me boy. That person on Twitter, sorry, fire truck, or police, or ambulance, actually, it's an ambulance. That person called me a name. It didn't feel good, but is that really a quote unquote struggle? Do I have any children like strapped to my back hiking over a mountain? I think I always sort of like immediately went to diminishing the effect of it by comparing them to like bigger life struggle. Like, oh, you have a full belly of food, you have electricity, you have dynamite Wi-Fi. What do you have to complain about? So that's how I always lessen microaggression. I think the process of writing about them, especially for this book, of just like going back to your history and just like accumulating them, then I started to feel the weight of them, certainly. Then I started to get annoyed / angry at things that I thought were long behind me. Like while I was writing these essays, I would be like, can't believe I let that thing happen when I was 14. I wish I had a time machine so I could go back and really give that person a piece of my mind. So yeah, it took a while for me to sort of accept that, oh, if you feel it, you felt it, right? It's not about the intention, it's about the impact. And if no one can deny the impact something has had on me.
I noticed in the Field Guide to the North American Teenager, you have that one scene where the hockey player calls the main character like hood and stuff like that, and they get in a fight later because it gets Norris punches him. So I feel like that you were using your art in order to kind of play out like that. If you had a time machine and you can go back to that moment, what you could kind of get some justice out of that. Is that accurate?
No, it is.
Or am I trying to therapize you?
No. I mean, please feel free to therapize me. It's very expensive. If people will do it for free, I will accept. Yeah, I think writing from the moment it sort of became a thing I did in English and in French, it's really where I felt powerful, silly, and sort of like over dramatic as that is. Sort of, I can write anything I want. I can say anything I want on paper. So I used that a lot. I wrote fan fiction when I was a very cool teen. It's like, oh yeah, I can resurrect the characters that I like that are dead. I went on Twitter. I can be snarky to Drake. Drake can't do anything to me on Twitter, but I can sort of like, you know, say, hey, your last album wasn't that good. Ridiculous chain, get better chains. So the written word had a lot of power for me. And I think when I started to write full-length novels, I just ended up writing about race a lot, which wasn't really something I had planned on doing. But when you put a lot of yourself into a character, their deeper concerns come through. So Norris Kaplan experiences racism. Henry, the protagonist from Charming as a Verb, he's from a super poor family background. So again, all these concerns that had been sort of like built in my life came through fiction. And then for this book, I just decided, hey, what if you just wrote it? What if you didn't sort of like funnel it through a 16-year-old teenager or a young adult narrative? What if you just wrote about your life and all your thoughts? If you get canceled for yourself. And that's what I ended up doing, which was very cathartic, but also exhausting in some ways, because through the process of writing it, a disclaimer I would like to give is that this was supposed to be a funner book. Like, I was writing it and the middle of summer 2020 happened, and it just like really brought everything to a halt. I got so angry. I got so sad. I didn't feel like writing like fun stories about dating on the apps anymore. I just wanted to write about race. So I think when I was rereading the full book, I was like, boy, there were a couple of really angry essays there near the end. What's up with that? But it was really just because I was allowing myself to be powerful in the writing and just to write it all out.
So that reminds me of a moment in the book where you're in a writing workshop and someone says something that just made my jaw drop when they said, oh, the story that you just submitted that we all talked about, it's such a universal story. The main character doesn't even have to be Black for it to work regarding like, that just kind of like blew my mind that someone would say that and try to make it seem like being white is the universal neutral. Like, yeah, you could have just taken race out of this. How did that, I don't know, how did it feel in that moment when that happened? And how have you given the middle finger to that person ever since then? Like spiritually in your writing?
Well, I've also given the middle finger to that person physically in person. Their back was turned. I'm a coward. I wouldn't do it to their face. I think it wasn't a jaw-dropping moment for me, partly because they were praising me. It was like, I think that's the messed up part. It was a compliment of the writing that like we were in a workshop and they enjoyed my story so much that they were trying to sort of like give me feedback, like, oh, you should submit this to this literary magazine, or, you know, do this with it, or lead a collection proposal with it. And that was one of their feedbacks. Like, it doesn't really have to be about a Black person. I felt something while reading it. So it has universal appeal, universal value. If I could go back in time, I would say, no, you felt something because I'm a damn good writer. But in the moment, it was sort of, oh my God, thank you so much for enjoying my story. Yay, I feel good after this workshop. And then it's this little ringing in the back of your mind while you're editing, while you're sort of putting submissions. You're like, wait, what? What? And especially being in a room where no one, myself included, said anything about it. It was just sort of like, all right, give compliment. Hey, you have a typo on page 7. Okay, let's keep going. And I think I was really most angry at myself for internalizing it, because my fists know no rage. I'm mouthy, but I'm also a coward, so I don't really get into confrontations with people. I will nod and smile. But that was a moment that, like, in hindsight, I was like, boy, I wish I was the type of person that would stand up and tell that person to bleep off and like just really make a moment of it. But I just wasn't that person. And then I was a little disappointed in myself for that. this is fully therapy now. I am sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, you're talking about this whole like trying to balance being witty and that like polite rage that builds up over time of experiencing this. I do want to pivot the conversation though to joy, specifically Black joy, because you have something to say about it in the book. So what are your feelings regarding Black joy, and how do you feel about like always being included in those lists when people make Black joy lists?
Oh, thank you for pivoting away from my impotent rage.
It's still there. It's still
I always had a low simmer underneath it all. I think I'm a pretty joyful person. I don't know. I like comedies. I like to laugh at TV. I go to bed watching sitcoms. I think a lot of things are really funny. If you've ever seen a person actually slip on a banana peel, my friend did that once and I just laughed for 5 minutes until I was like coughing. It was the funniest thing ever. So I always felt a little odd at first when my voice and my books were being like championed as like important Black stories. Like, well, I'm a narcissist writer, so yeah, I think it's important. I'm Black, so yeah, they're Black stories, but I never set out to say something particularly important about society. I honestly just, the highest compliment for my novels to this day is that, oh, this was funny. Like, yeah, that's literally what I set out to do. If I made a reader laugh 4 times in a book, I think that's a huge success. So it always felt a little strange at the beginning when my books were being hailed as like subversive or important. No, they're coming of age YA stories, you know, and the kids want girlfriends and they want to go to prom, and those are sort of like the surface concerns of a lot of them. And I think something happened early, and it took me a while to realize that like that was my aesthetic. Because in my first book, The Field Guide to a North American Teenager, there's a moment that happens between the protagonist, Norris Kaplan, and a white cop. And basically Norris gets drunk and he mouths off to a white cop. And I was so shocked because when I was in that early stage of your first book being out, you're on, you know, Goodreads all the time, like refreshing. Is there a new review? Validate me. That was me. A lot of people like flagged that moment as being a moment that was lacking. They're like, yeah, it felt like the writer didn't really have the guts to go there. And I was just like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to write people getting shot. That's essentially the expectation that was built around that moment. Writing Black suffering, writing stories of Black people dealing with gun violence. And part of it is just my privilege. Like I didn't grow up in an inner city. So anything I would write that would sort of talk about that in America, I grew up in, you know, poor apartments in Quebec, but that's the world I know. So I feel like it would be me writing out of my lane, so to speak, to sort of say like, hey, gun violence is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. So that's what all my books are going to be about. My books are about people who feel awkward in their skins. They happen to be Black, trying to sort of like get a happy ending. They're pretty conventional in that way, and I kind of love it that way. And what's great about those lists, that label of Black joy, you know, it is another monolithic race label that's like, hey, this guy's happy. Angie Thomas is like about struggle and sadness and gun violence. And I think like any writers out in the world, we have a multitude of colors, right? We can hit all the notes. I'm a joyful person, but there's also a bottomless pit of rage in there. So you can hit all the colors, but I do identify with joy. I do like the fact it's a great thing to hear that your stories and your books bring joy to people. That always makes me happy. More so than I think if people were. I've read some very well-written sort of like cultural lens analyses of my writing. And I'm like, wow, this is a great argument. It's completely off, but this is a great argument. I did not set out to criticize the immigration system. It just, maybe it happened, but it was totally accidental. But I did set out to make people laugh and make people feel things. So Black joy is a label I wholeheartedly accept.
Hey, it circles back and you get to laugh when those academic papers come in and they're totally off. So at least someone's laughing there.
That is very true. It's just, oh yeah, a teenager writing about like what was it? The racial inequality within the academic system is I someone sent me a paper they wrote for 2,000 words on that topic based on my book. It was a very well written paper, but I was like, oh, did not see that in there. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I really like the point where it's not monolithic. Your joy is your own joy. Like, and that I think is what is missing when you're a racist. When someone is a racist. When they're racist, they're looking at you and all they see is the color of your skin. They're judging you based off of that. They're pigeonholing you into something, and they're not really considering the humanity, everything that makes you unique and a special person. So I really find that your writing was just trying to undo all of that and just say like, hey, sure, I'll be your Black friend, but you got to know some stuff about me. I'm not just Black. I'm also a whole bunch of other stuff, including angry, but also joyful and funny. So I really appreciate that. So we do have, I want to get to this one question that's waiting there. So please submit your questions in the Q&A. But first, I wanted to ask, because it's really important, especially after the hellacious year we had, how are you taking care of yourself? Like, what do you do? Because this work, it drains you. Thinking about this drains you. What do you do to re-energize yourself, your spirit?
I try not to take it all too seriously. I've been very lucky in that I wasn't in financial distress this year. 2 years ago, deep financial distress. This past year, I wasn't. So that's a blessing I had, and my immediate family was safe and happy. I don't know if I take care of myself. I think I just survive. I wish I was a person that was like, I read books, but I read books before. I watch TV. I watched TV before. I have a dog.
That still counts. That counts.
The dog helps. I try not to be too, in fairness to myself, I try to be fair to myself, which is a Game of Thrones quote. I just try to like realize that I teach too. So I have a lot of students who are just having a rough go of being in college. Their parents are in financial strife to get them a degree in film studies, which maybe wasn't the right choice, I'm just saying. And they're they can't go to class, they're in their dorm or back home. And it's just, I feel the weight of everything that's on their shoulders. And I just tell them like, take it easy on yourself, be nicer to yourself. And there are students, I think I see a lot of like the deepest things that give me anxiety, I see them in my students. So in giving them pep talks, I end up giving myself a pep talk. Like the students that are really self-deprecating, I'm like, stop being self-deprecating. It's not charming. You're just really insulting yourself every time you say something smart. So stop it. And just by voicing that, I internalize some of it. So teaching, keeps me happy, keeps me going. The bar doesn't need to be as high as happy. It keeps me going.
See, I'm really superficial. I'm all about the tension tamer tea and rewatching RuPaul's Drag Race. That's how I'm keeping care of myself.
Podcast. Okay, now we're just gonna share. Okay. I have ordered a full cake and eaten like most of it. Like the fork stays in the cake, stays in the fridge. I have done that.
What flavor of cake?
It was like the milk bar cake, like the naked cake that's just layers of vanilla confetti cake. I have done that. It's delicious. And also podcasts. One of my great joys is finding a new podcast and just like draining it. Just like listening to every episode. I love discovering a new podcast that has like a back catalog of 200 episodes because I will just desiccate them. I'm like, oh, my ears can be filled for 18 hours a day. Which, given my traffic.
The soundscapes of the city.
Exactly. Ben's just in the kitchen laughing to podcasts.
I have coworkers who listen to a lot of podcasts, particularly ones that deal with race and issues like that, but that they're also like funny and conversational. So it's been really helpful for them to kind of like process all these emotions while like gardening or something like that. Yeah, so let's cover some of these questions that have come in.
Really? Only
So
questions again. I'm an open book, and people never take advantage of that. They're very polite with the questions.
In your experience, how can owners or managers support the Black, Brown, Asian employees during the workplace exploration on such a sensitive topic as white employees navigate this for the first time?
Don't put too much burden on them. And I'm underlining that in your experience thing. I think it makes sense, but I have definitely been at those meetings where they're like, okay, it's Black History Month. What should we do? And then all eyes are on the two Black people in the room. I don't know what we should do for Black History Month. I think we should celebrate it, but I'm not the encyclopedia of how to go about doing it. I think, speaking of, I'm sorry, affirming everything to Black History Month, but remembering that there are 11 other months in a year. Like there are months that celebrate, LGBTQ months. There's Pride Month. There's Women's History Month. There's Black History Month. And, those are all 1 month out of the year. That doesn't mean like all the books that pertain to that month that's being celebrated have to move to the back of the store on March 1st. I think I've definitely walked by that bookstore, like not a bookstore that did that. It's like, oh wow, Obama, Michelle, look at all these people, RuPaul, everyone's there. And then you walk by the next day, it's like, oh, where is oh right, it's March 1st, right. So don't place too much of a burden on people. And also, I think the universal advice I can give is really power through that first feeling. The bad feeling when someone tells you like, I don't feel seen, I don't feel heard, this didn't feel great. It's not easy for them to bring that up. So power through your first gut reaction to find the next step. And I think that applies to everyone. Like I'm a cis male and I have students who are trans, and I freely admit that it took a while to wire my brain to using they, them pronouns. Like not as long as people seem to think. It's not like a huge, like, oh my God, I have to have brain surgery. But it took like a few, I don't know, months of using it like colloquially every day for my brain to default to that. And I did it. And if it makes people feel seen, if it makes people feel included in the conversation that's happening, it is a small cost to do that, but I acknowledge that it's a cost for some people. But it didn't feel great the first time I had someone say like, hey, when you do that, that really feels shitty. And my first initial reaction is like, well, I don't mean to make you feel shitty. I'm one of the good ones. I'm Black in America. Like you should, yeah.
You're focusing on yourself in that moment.
Exactly. You turn it right around on yourself. And you're just like, people are like, hey, I'm experiencing sexism. Racism though, like we almost turned into this weird competition. And I think that kills like so much of the progress and conversations we could have.
Absolutely. I think as booksellers, we try to be very polite and not confrontational. So often you find that booksellers, white booksellers, will avoid the conversation. So in the moment where it's like, hey, let's put this display together about Asian American Pacific Islanders, and we have a couple Asian booksellers on staff that we can ask. I wouldn't ask them though, because I don't feel great. Like maybe that'll be offensive. I would say you have to invite everyone to the table, and if they're willing to participate, then they can participate. But you have to make sure that you're opening it up so that they have the access to be able to do that. And the second thing I would do say to all bookstores is you're about to go into a 21-day racial equity challenge. And of course, this is not going to end after 21 days. And you need to make sure that your leadership staff in your bookshop is doing a racial diversity course together. because it's very important that the leadership shows that they're committed to doing the work. And it's not just in the statement. It's not just in like putting some displays together. You really have to look at every part of your process and really analyze it. And you're not going to be able to do that in just a few days. It's going to take years. So you have to make sure that your leadership is committed to that kind of work, I think.
And I that's so well said. And I think, stores and businesses and schools, I think there's sometimes an urge just to have the conversation facing the window, the display. That's like, what is the world seeing that we're doing? And that's important. That's you using your platform. That's the message you're sending out to the world. But what are you doing for inside, when the shutters are closed? Your employees, do they feel like this is a safe environment? Do they feel like they have to sort of be a champion? It's not always fun to be the champion. Do they feel like they have a safe workspace? Looking inward as well as outward, I think, is a good way of going about it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got another question here from Mark Kaufman. Dear Ben and Luis, you two beautiful souls. Thank you. Would you please look to the future and discuss how you see things changing in the near future? Is this change for good? How about let's talk about that hashtag publishing paid me thing that you participated in.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's a big force for change.
Yeah, I didn't participate in it. I mean, I participated in that. Like, I clicked it and I read through all of them and I took notes. I didn't post mine. Okay, that's a good example. I'm sure everyone here knows, but like a few months ago, authors just like disclosed how much they were making in how much they made in their book deals. And I think just that level of transparency just empowers people. I always assumed that, like, for the longest time before I wrote books myself, I was like, oh, anyone who sells a book probably has like $500,000 in the bank, because all the stories I see online, I was like, oh, this person had a 6-figure book advance. That's $250,000 at least. That every author is super wealthy. And then I became a writer myself, and I'm like, oh, no, I know writers who have amazing award-winning books who are also bartenders, who were also like counting the days and hours to their stimulus check. I think that's a level of disparity that is often like cloaked, and just removing that cloak, I think, is a good way of making the world better. Despite my voice and my joy, I tend to be a pessimist. I'm trying to like move myself out of it, but I do think that like transparency is a good way of going about it. Just like talking about your experience, because it's unimpeachable. You might not have all the answers, but when you put things in an I statement, you're only speaking the truth. You're only speaking what you experience and how it changed you. And that goes for small internal stuff like microaggressions, but it also goes for my first book deal. Gave me a total of $33,000 per book in 3 payments, once upon signing, once upon delivery of first draft, and once upon the day of publishing. That's way more than a lot of people. That's way less than a lot of people. And then now it's out there. So if you are ever haggling or just like in a position of like demanding money, your worth, and also what the market is holding. Because I think there's not a phase of my career where I didn't find myself like Googling to know how things are done. Google, how do you find an agent? Google, how much does an agent take out of your check? Google, how many copies should you sell? Like, and I think everyone is doing the same thing. So transparency can help bring everyone under the umbrella of this thing we love, which is books.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about how when in publishing, there's a lot of obfuscation, a lot of like cloaks and mirrors. And that's kind of in a way so that the publishers can be at a point of power, mm-hmm. and be able to take advantage of people and their talents. And it's really unfortunate. So I really feel like you being so transparent is helping pave the way toward more people understanding how the gears work, how the sausage gets made. So I appreciate that. The other thing what I would say from my own experience is this is just the start of the conversation. I feel like in the short term, I think it's great that we're taking the time in order to curate book lists, to really look at our inventory, but we need to make sure that we're dedicating that energy to all aspects of our book selling. So if you're going to hand sell something to someone, if you're going to put a book in a mystery box or send a subscription out to someone based on their tastes, that you try to look for those BIPOC authors so that then the publishers can see like that those writers are really being sent out across the world and across the country. I think that's really important that we do that. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if I know exactly what it's going to look like in a few months, particularly after the year that we had, and all plans just got thrown into a shredder. But I really hope that everyone just remembers not to put this by the wayside.
And I think one thing that might have changed, or at least I'm noticing now, is that stan culture has like taken over books, the book world too, which I think is a great thing, because so much of the conversation is always framed around like cancel culture. Should we cancel this person? Cancel this person? This person was canceled. I have less interest in that than I have in stan culture. When people, book retailers, like people who control the shelves, really love someone. Like if you've read a book, you really love that book. It has a printing run of 200 books. Order 20 more and display it proudly on your shelf. I promise you that does more than canceling Candace Owens. Although I say that, but please, my God, can someone cancel Candace Owens? Please do it now. But like just elevating people, embracing joy over the pit of impotent rage really helps. And like, I see it from retailers because of social media all the time. Like someone holding a book that they really like, that I've never heard of, and just being really happy to talk about that book does so much for the author, for the publishers. It's just, it all adds up. It trickles down, I promise.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan had a lot of bad ideas, but something like that will trickle down.
Yeah, no, that's trickles up. It goes to the right channel.
Good, yeah, it reverberates. How about that? It reverberates.
Amazing word. Obfuscation, reverberates. We're so smart today.
I went to school.
You know.
So thank you so much, Ben. This was so great. I really have to profusely apologize though. We did not talk about Naruto like I had promised that we were. We had so much other stuff to talk about.
But your knowledge of Naruto is superficial at best. I need to deep dive into people who can talk about the Akatsuki with me. No, I had such a blast talking about this. It wasn't too bad, right?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much. I really wanted to say thank you, especially for that last point, because you're bringing together how we can use our joy in order to have this conversation and to continue to make positive change in this world. So thank you for letting us know that by book selling and by sharing the books that we love, we can really add to this conversation and make reverberations.
We're the good people. It's only up from where we are because we work with books all day.
Yeah.
And we're the good people. I sincerely believe that. I've met 2 book retailers who were having a bad day or I didn't feel joy from, but 99.9% of book retailers are just amazing people who want to share this thing that they're passionate and love. And so let's all be nice and nicer on ourselves when we're sort of like asking and assessing how much we can do to change the world. We give books to people. That's a pretty good thing.
Yeah. And speaking of books, please check out Ben Philippe's book. It comes out on April 27th, right?
Yes. Wait.
April 27th.
Somewhere.
Okay.
Yes.
I have it. April 27th. Sure, I'll be your black friend. Notes from the other side of the fist bump. It is very good. It is if you liked how frank Philippe is and how honest he is in this conversation, you're really going to enjoy the book. So please check it out.
Cover, so the publisher won't yell at me for not displaying the cover. Grain of salt.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And I hope you look into this 21 days of SIBA's 21-day racial equity challenge, and you really internalize what you learn and take it out into the world to make those reverberations.
Heck yeah. See you day 22 and beyond. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ben.
Bye.
Bye.